Question: what happens when you have a bunch of tryhards who can't even agree on what constitutes common decency together in a multiplayer mail game? Answer: you get a repeat of all the same bullshit that I've been talking about for months. Hello and welcome to the War Room number 30, where today I'll be talking about some of the common themes that have emerged in this latest multiplayer game, and especially the results of the session this past Sunday. I'm a couple weeks behind in editing and uploading videos, so obviously it's going to be a while before we get to this stage of the campaign. I'm going to give you a bit of background first, and then I'm going to show you some actual video clips from the session. Now to start the background, we have to go all the way back to the beginning of this campaign. This campaign actually follows a very short-lived one-session-long campaign that used an altered rule set. Now this rule set was one that I was asked to come up with, and I did. I came up with it based on all the conclusions that were reached in the 4 previous War Room videos. Now these rules weren't perfect, and especially the means by which we determined who the most powerful players were, that was highly flawed. But rather than refining that, the conclusion was to throw out everything and start over from scratch with a much watered down rule set, let's just put it that way. But because of this watered down rule set, we see a reemergence of essentially all of the same problems that I talked about previously. And a bit more background regarding this previous session in particular. For this session, I basically rolled out of bed, hopped on my computer, and jumped in the game. I didn't have time to talk to anyone. I didn't know anything that was specifically going on. And as far as the situation I'm going to be focusing on today, I had no real idea what was going on over there for most of the campaign, and even as I was recording it, I didn't understand the full extent of what was happening. And it wasn't until after I left the game, left for several hours, and then came back, that I understood the extent of the shitstorm that was caused as a result of this session. Hundreds of Discord messages, an hour-long discussion and voice chat, dozens of messages with individuals about what happened on each particular side. And we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Let's play some clips. This is interesting. What's going on?
But just know, every pulse could be my last.
Is this a real war?
Yeah, I think he's attacking England. He was
Cool.
talking about attacking Aquitaine earlier.
And destroy London again?
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Show strength.
So strength. At the same time. Oh yeah, so Milan and Granada both attacking, yeah.
Well, 2 different wars. Italy declared a humiliation war. Wow. It's kind of rough
Finally
for, huh?
Well, if it might be worth it to just unconditionally surrender to Italy within a year, but
You don't have to unconditional surrender, you just surrender.
alright.
No, if he surrenders, he can add gold and what? Yeah, actually.
No.
No, yeah, he just said show strength, so that's all he can take. That's a 100% war score too, so he can't add anything on it.
Nada, what do you want?
You are not allowed to colonize in Africa, South America, and east of Florida. So that leaves like the New York area and Canada. And Leopardy and Buspatu. And stop pirating the channel for Marley.
So I'm not going to give up anything.
What?
I'm not giving up anything.
Your vassal Aquitaine is giving up 2 provinces.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, do you surrender?
You have to type in chat.
Because then we
You have
stop sieging, otherwise we are allowed to stop, but we aren't.
Wait, what am I supposed to do?
to
Type in
type
chat,
surrender in chat. You type yes. Milan doesn't really get a ton from you.
So as we saw, Granada and Tunis declared war on England, and specifically Granada wanted 2 provinces, and the rest of the peace deal was all in the form of essentially diplomatic sanctions. We'll talk about that issue more later, but basically he's declaring war for 2 provinces, plus 1 sanction that would keep England from pirating the Netherlands, and another sanction that would keep England from colonizing anything except for the 13 colonies region plus Canada. A second simultaneous war was declared by Italy to show strength. And now I have to point out that The person playing England was not the regular England player. The regular England player is Y-Man. But Y-Man couldn't make the session, so he ended up with a substitute today. And that substitute was the same one that was the focus of the last P-Doc short that I uploaded, which is Hungary inexplicably white piecing while winning a war against the Ottomans. That sub was playing as England, and as you saw, instantly surrendered to everything that was asked of him. I'll talk about the implications more later on, but first let's continue with some video clips from later on in the session. Now before we continue with the clips, I'm going to point out that these clips started approximately 10 minutes before the session was scheduled to end. Keep that in mind as you're watching. England and Aquitaine. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I think so. Rematch. Of the last one.
Granada is going to take over France. For Normandy? Wow.
What the fuck do you want, Granada?
Wants
Like
it
I
all.
said, the Anjou course. And for Marley, he wants Normandy and Evreshin.
But I want some money, please.
Some money.
If that's not too much to ask.
Wait, ask Marley to separate peace for the provinces because I can't do it otherwise. I can't take the provinces for him now because they're not occupied.
Sorry, Watson. I forgot to pause and tell you what the word. You were in the channel, so.
I'm not surrendering to you, Brady.
Well, you come and get me then. I have Italy in 3 years.
Does that mean I get more power protection? Yay me.
Yep.
Is Marley, are you in here? No.
Come
Where is
on,
he?
send a peace offer.
Well, if you're surrendering, you have to allow him to occupy the land he demanded if he can't give it to Marley. So Marley gets to occupy Normandy and Everson. Because he can't actually demand what his war goals were.
Well, you have to just.
Then you have
take
to
it and
unconditional
sell it to
surrender.
him. No, you have
No,
to take
you'd
it
have to
and
unconditional
no,
surrender
no.
then.
Yep.
You either surrender or they get to occupy. It's either one.
You can do an unconditional surrender.
then take it.
Then you have okay.
No, listen, nonsense. You can unconditionally surrender and they won't be able to take more than 100.
Yeah, they're only allowed to take what they declared for.
We can unconditionally surrender before 12 months have passed.
No, we can wait. We can retreat. If you say you surrender, right? And just
Or
wait.
DJ, just occupy those two provinces.
I can.
No, leave my country. I will surrender to you guys. Just have to take care of this shitty Brady.
Madsen, since we're stopping in 10 minutes anyway, why don't you just
Did you
go to the
unpause?
island for 10 minutes and then Wyman can come back and negotiate the peace?
Why would you need to wait for unconditional surrender? Can't you just send the peace terms and accept it? I'm confused.
Land's going to different people, so they don't have it occupied.
Yeah.
Why can't they just take it and then sell it?
It's just a burden to him.
And
he's
that, yeah,
winning the
that's
war.
20 prestige for he'd have to lose to sell those two provinces.
Tell
And
Netherlands
aggressive
to get
expansion.
out. Tell Netherlands. I told them.
I'm going out. You can unpause. I'm moving back.
Could you stop
And
the
move
random
your
pause?
fleet.
I'd rather not.
No, but he needs to fight to. He needs
Could
to
we
fight the
stop the
Swiss.
incessant pausing?
Move your fucking fleet.
Lego.
Hey,
Why is
Netherlands,
Madsen pausing 24/7?
can you just
dear
move
God.
your fleet to stop him from pausing?
Can you just offer him peace? Like, I don't understand what's going on. Aren't you
Because
Madsen
they
wants
can't
the peace
ask
out as
what
soon as
their war
possible,
goals
and
are.
they can't ask for the peace if he
I can-
surrenders.
Move
like
your
this.
fucking fleet.
If he doesn't surrender, they can't offer the deal.
Yeah.
God, artillery is
Norfleet,
so
can I ask him-
expensive.
Can I ask you to take all this money? Make him take a loan. What the hell? You just unconditional.
To you?
Yes.
Oh well. Take everything. As long as it isn't in the channel.
Annex, do it.
Vassalize.
So what is my demand? Is it unconditional granted whatever I declared for?
You said
Not a whole lot. I did
Reconquest?
reconquest of Orleans, so
So, I
that's
guess.
all Orleans' course.
That's basically the accepted idea, so you should do it that way.
What's the discussion about?
About what Freddy is allowed to
Lego.
take.
Yes.
I'm allowed to demand the money in the peace deal when my goal was a reconquest of course of Orleans.
Well, Granada demanded money, and he
Yeah, he
didn't. Yeah, so.
I should be allowed to, right?
Yeah.
There we go.
Subs kill nations.
I built artillery for this.
Well, I have a really short truce. It's only until 35. 9 years. You know what we can use artilleries for, though? There's this, like, yellow dude who took my Würzburg.
He has a pretty nice city you can loot.
Yeah.
Or so I heard.
Okay. England is protected for the rest of this session.
And now he left.
Is it?
Oh my
Oh
god.
shit.
Yeah.
He's protected
'Cause-
for -2 minutes. Whatever shall we do?
Weidman's gonna be pretty upset when he realizes that he just lost half his country.
I was trying to tell Madsen he could have just waited until Wyman got back and then he could negotiate the pieces, but
No, I think Wyman's gonna be more happy with this result.
Clearly. Clearly.
No one tell him I
I
did
don't
this, by the
understand
way.
what happened here, though. Like, he pieced out of the first one, I thought, could just get at me.
And then he just gave
And then
you
he
everything
just
as
pieced out
well.
to me as well.
No, but the thing is, he said they were the larger alliance, but right now I have the largest land army in Europe, so...
Yeah, no, but I mean, you I feel like I might have just gotten next level. Like, he just stole noble power from me by making me raise my noble levies, and then just surrender to me.
Yeah, he's gonna get you next war.
Next level, man. Gonna have those unstable nobles.
First, he messes up the Hungary game, then he messes up the England game.
Why,
Subs are
Madsen?
good for your nation.
Look
Can I
at
ask
France.
for-
Something happened.
Shouldn't he be banned for nation ruining? Twice?
I don't
that
think he
second
nation-
surrender made no sense. Like, he should at least fought me and
can
tried
we
to
ban
get
him
for
for nation
peace.
ruining? That sounds good to me.
Yeah, that seems
That
fair.
first one, yeah. I don't know.
Showed up, ruined Hungary left, showed up, ruined England left. Like, please.
Hungary's not ruined.
Isn't he like 2k in debt? 3k?
No,
was.
he has no debt.
Oh, well. It's
But
probably
he
hell of
did
a
a
company.
solid one on England, though.
Yes.
Okay.
Was he the one who misclicked the white piece?
Yes.
Yeah, that
Ah,
was
okay.
him.
Okay, that's as much
Everyone
as
sunk like a billion manpower into a war that ended with a white peace earlier as well. It's
Fucking
great.
great.
I was more annoyed at that one, honestly. That just feels so bad.
Well, yeah, because you benefited from this one.
Well, it's more that we spent so much time on it. Like, we sat there fighting forever, and then, oh shit, I misclicked. Like, oh my god. Please. Give me my time back.
So now let's go through all the problems that happened in reverse order. First off, with about 10 minutes left in the campaign, rather than holding out for 10 minutes and then allowing the actual England player to come in and conduct some diplomacy, the English sub separate peace to every single person he was at war with. And then the icing on the cake is the sub actually quit the game. So he's waited just long enough to individually peace out with everyone, and then after he peaced out, he left. If he'd at least left before peacing out, the AI could have kept the war going for 10 minutes. I mean, that's not hard to do. Kept the war going for 10 minutes, the session ends, and then Y-Man comes back and he can actually see the situation and conduct some diplomacy and figure out what's going on. That whole opportunity is now gone. Going further back in time, the next problem we encounter is that in a game where supposedly a maximum of 3 players can be on the attacking side in any war, we have at least 4 players, I think 5, but I'd have to go through with a fine-tooth comb to verify that, all at war with England at the same time. As I mentioned in the coalitions video, this is the expected result when you limit the number of allies that a player can have. Individual micro-coalitions will declare war on a single target to make a de facto coalition. Same exact problem. Coupled with that, and along the lines of common decency, we again have a coalition declaring war on a single nation controlled by a substitute no less, 10 minutes before the session ends. Because separate wars were declared, and the sum total of everything that was claimed was well over 100%. There's no possible way this could have been concluded in 10 minutes of actual warfare. What happened instead is the sub panicked and insta-peaced out. Okay, so that's the second war. Now let's go back to the first war. In the first war, Granada is declaring for 2 provinces plus 2 separate sanctions. Now the problem here is actually the sanctions. For those of you who've been watching my videos for a while, you're probably familiar with the way that treaties work in the various Victoria II groups. Now, treaties can be cumbersome. You essentially need to have a law degree to understand them, and especially if you're making a treaty with Gurin, well, just don't make a treaty with Gurin. But there are some valid uses for treaties. So back in the rule set for that single session campaign that I ran before this one started, I added a provision for something that I called formal negotiations, which is you can make an agreement with the player, make it public, and then you both stick to it. The important thing is that it cut out all of that legalese that makes treaties so convoluted and abusable in the Victoria II groups. Well, as the rules got changed going into this campaign, that got watered down and actually became imposable. So for 30 wars score, you can actually impose, wouldn't be a formal agreement in this case, I might call it a sanction. You can impose a sanction on a player. And this isn't an agreement to trade anything. This isn't an agreement of you do this if I do that. This is a one-way agreement. And it actually turned out that all formal agreements became one-way agreements. That is, some sanction is being imposed on a player. You won't do this, you won't do that, you will do this that will benefit me, that sort of thing. There's no give and take possible. It's all one-sided. This is not at all how they were intended to be used. It could be used that way, especially if you're using it as part of a peace deal negotiation, but that's for negotiation. This is actually something that's imposed. If you want to imagine why this is a problem, imagine a situation where you're at war with Gurin, you lose the war, and then as part of the peace deal, you get a one-sided treaty imposed on you. You have zero choice to refuse it, and if you break it, you suffer all the same consequences that would be expected in case you broke an actual agreement. Now, I'm sure that if Gurin's listening to this, he's thinking to himself right now, this sounds like a great idea. I could abuse this to no end, and I should get this into every single campaign I'm currently playing in. No. Bad, Gurin. Bad. But back to the issue at hand. Now, there is a provision for nullifying treaties, but that's really beside the point. Before I introduce this concept of formal agreements, the way agreements worked in the past was something like this. You go to a nation, you say, if you do this, I will kill you. And then they said, okay, I won't do that, and then maybe you won't kill me. And then, more or less it worked out. But now a nation can come along and say, if you do this, I will kill you, but not only will I kill you, you'll also lose stability by virtue of having broken the agreement that you didn't actually agree to. Now it makes no sense at all, and I'm completely against the system. So that's the problem with the current implementation of formal agreements. Let's talk about what actually happened as a result of this war. Granada declared on England for 2 provinces, plus at minimum 2 different formal agreements. One formal agreement said, don't pirate the Netherlands, and another agreement said, don't colonize 90% of the land you can currently colonize around the world. Without fighting a single battle, the substitute for England surrendered to those war demands. Now, why is this a problem? This sets a really dangerous precedent, because formal agreements don't necessarily have an expiration date. That means that the substitute can get on your country, make a formal agreement of any kind with any nation, and when you come back to your country, you have to abide by that formal agreement. Makes no sense. And if you break that agreement, you lose stability as a result of something your substitute did. So basically the problem is this substitute had no authority to accept either one of those 2 agreements. If England had been 100%ed in the war, then under the current rule set, 60% of that 100% could have gone towards imposing these 2 sanctions. But it didn't. He just insta-surrendered. So there's yet another problem with what happened in this session. Now let's go back even further. As we saw, this was a coordinated attack on England. This coordinated attack was planned out well in advance of the session, which again goes against the guideline of not spending all week long conducting diplomacy, but that's a personal gripe. So anyway, Granada put a whole lot of work into it, made deals with lots of people, just to make sure this would go off without a hitch. According to those metrics, Granada did great. His diplomacy paid off. Sure, I guess. It is true, he got a bunch of land out of it. And again, I was not aware of any of this before the campaign started. As you can see from the recordings, I was hardly even paying attention to that area or the war, And the reason why is because I've had essentially zero interaction with anyone in that area. I haven't talked to Wyman. I barely talked to Snorfiets. I've hardly talked with First Cast. I've not had reason to talk with Netherlands or Switzerland at all. And frankly, I didn't even know who was playing these different nations because it just didn't matter to me. So the fact that Wyman wasn't there didn't even occur to me until even after the session. Even as people were talking about him being a sub, I just went over my head. Was not paying attention. Hadn't had enough coffee, I guess. Well, anyway, before the session even started, Wyman made it clear that he did not want a sub. And the reason he didn't want a sub is that a sub can surrender to wars as they're declared, just as Madston did. An AI is not going to surrender without actually fighting a war. So if they declared that first war on an AI, that AI would have just sat in England, and yes, they would have had a ticker, but they wouldn't have been able to take over 100% without actually fighting some battles. Fighting some battles depletes both sides, but, you know, it actually takes manpower and money if you're going to fight a war. So yes, England would have, in all likelihood, lost the first war. It would have been 100%ed by Granada, certainly. But the second war, the show's strength, is a bit more questionable, is a bit more dubious. It would have taken a lot of effort to get that AI to peace out to show strength. It's possible the AI might not have peaced out for that in any reasonable amount of time. But that's beside the point. The AI would have at least fought the war. Now when it came to the second war, there's no question that that war would have continued at least until the beginning of the next session. So Wyman could have come back, see his country's at war, maybe he's even half occupied, it doesn't really matter. The fact is, he would have some options, he'd come back, see the situation, and decide what to do next. But that's not what happened, because there was a sub on that country. That sub panicked, and he peaced out instantly for everything that was demanded of him. So really, that's the linchpin of the whole issue. If there were no instructions, and there was a sub, and the sub did something stupid, well, I'm sorry, you should have had a better sub. You specifically say you don't want a sub because of these reasons, and then you get a sub, well, that's not really your fault then, is it? Well, I left for hours, I came back, there was a huge discussion about what had happened, and basically, the consensus is that something needs to be done. If we were to go point by point, and we say, we find that Wyman shouldn't have lost any land, nothing should have happened as far as transfers or anything like that, everything is returned to Wyman. Well, the problem then is that it's true, Granada, Italy, Switzerland, and the Netherlands, they called up levies, they built units, they did all this stuff to prepare for the war. So yes, they lost out on this, right? And also with all the land that Granada took, this was not a return core, this was actually a conquest. So all of this land gave AE, and Granada now has a potential coalition across much of Europe. So that's a bit of a problem. If we go 100% in favor of Granada, then basically what we're saying is that Wyman, even though you said you didn't want a sub, you got one anyway, and now you have to live with it. So that's not really a viable answer either. Now the situation of the second war is the most dubious because that was the one that happened right before the end of the session. The one that there's no reason why that should have been pieced out so quickly. So it's pretty well unanimous that everything that was gained in that second war should be returned. And Netherlands, Switzerland, Italy, everyone over here is on board with that, the exception being Granada. The gains from the first war are a bit more questionable because that was earlier in the session, could have been an actual war but wasn't. So the question is, how much stuff needs to be returned to Wyman? Being one of the admins, I weighed in on this. And again, the linchpin of the whole thing is whether Wyman specifically said he didn't want a sub or not. And he did. As far as I'm concerned, that heavily weights things in his favor. But it is true that other people lost things as a result of the war, and not just the land that they'll be losing back to England. The biggest potential loser in the situation is Granada, given that he was the one that orchestrated the whole thing. He was the one that conducted the behind-the-scenes diplomacy to make this work out, and he also granted some concessions to other people. For example, not contesting Italy and taking over the Papal State, which, spoilers, last resort is no longer the Papal State, as you can probably guess. Anyway, Granada played his hand, you know, it's all on the table. Plus, the other people that had something to gain from Granada's diplomacy had already gained it. They're not going to lose that back as a result. The one who stands to lose the most is Granada. Plus, Granada's left with a very annoying to edit out coalition, potentially, that spans most of Central and Western Europe. That is a real problem, but it's not an insurmountable problem. The end result, after much deliberation, as I understand it, is that most of the land that was lost is being returned to Wyman, with the exception of some provinces in the south which are going to be kept by Granada, and Y-Man is getting 1k gold as compensation. And unfortunately, this is the kind of situation where no one is going to be happy with the outcome, and you know, it's just the way it goes. But the biggest surprise for me is actually that Granada has decided to rage quit. Again, going back to that very first War Room video that I published after my long break, where I talked about the reasons why people rage quit, thresholds for people rage quitting. So here we have a nation that's incredibly powerful, and yes, it's true, he will have lost the most as a result of this outcome versus anyone else who took part. Compared to when he started the session, he hasn't lost a single thing. The one potential issue is the coalition that might form, but at present, he has a very viable nation. Well, having a viable nation apparently isn't good enough, so Granada has now rage quit. Now, luckily, the nation itself is not being abandoned, so someone else will hop onto it, and I expect they'll be able to continue and keep it viable. But really, I'm shocked that someone would rage quit over something so minor. Now, if you're following the series, what we'll be getting to soon is the series of wars on the Ottomans, and as I mentioned, this is not the first time that multiple micro-coalitions have converged on a single player or group of players. And I do feel like this is one of the biggest issues that we've had in this campaign. Individual alliances are small by design, but that hasn't changed the fact that the larger coalitions are pounding on individual players and ripping them apart, which entirely defeats the purpose of limiting the number of allies that you can have. As you can see, as a result of my war with the Ottomans, which is part of this larger coalition, sad to say, I did end up with some land in the south, and I'll be selling that back to them. So as far as I'm concerned, my involvement with this is over. But this is something that continues to be an issue, and at least the current rule set has done nothing to address it. That's one problem we need to fix. We've clearly got a situation where specific players are frankly devoting way too much time and effort to overthinking this whole campaign. And you can see that in the people who are constantly trying to make backroom deals. And I don't want to call out anyone by name. Granada, for one. But there are clearly plenty of other players who, you know, are just kind of taking a chill attitude about it. And I hope they manage to stick around because, you know, as individual nations are wiped out, most of the AIs are gone already. And, you know, once players have exhausted the expansion routes around them, who else is left to go into? Well, it's these other players who obviously aren't putting as much effort into the game, but really they're just kind of doing their own thing. If you've been watching the campaign, you know that Meep is still alive to my south, and that's by design. I told him, you know, the optimum thing for me to do would be to annex him, but I decided not to do that. And it remains to be seen whether that's going to come back to bite me in the ass later, but at least for now, I'm happy to have him there. I could say the same thing obviously applies to Cone here, which hasn't expanded much, but obviously he's way better off than he was when he started. But I have been kind of surprised at how quick players are to turn on those who have even minor inconveniences. We had a viable Muscovy up until recently. That country is now abandoned and dead, and people are moving further east, which presents problems of its own. And it looks like we'll even have someone on Ming starting soon. So really that's about it. Maybe the whole concept of the fair fight is just too far-fetched. It seems to be working out relatively well in the Victoria 2 campaign at least. But in this EU4 campaign, I think we've got enough players from different backgrounds, that is, some of which are just fundamentally opposed to the rules and guidelines that we came up with in the Filthy Casuals. And I expect that as this game progresses, we're going to see those same players going out of their way to annex other players, drop the player count, and in the process of winning the game, end up ruining the campaign. But we'll see what happens. Thanks for watching and have a good one.